about our basic rights as our animal rights, the rights that we share with other animals, because we are animals. On top of those basic animal rights, we build human rights. So, hi everyone, thanks for coming. I gave this talk yesterday, and for the sake of the video, it was to a packed room, standing room only it was, and I lost my voice, so we're doing it again, and hopefully without losing the voice. This talk is really, it's a bit weird in the sense that I do these talks in order to introduce vegans, particularly recent vegans or new vegans even, or pre-vegans, to their own movement, because the vegan movement is quite remarkable in terms of its values and its scope, as we'll see. And I did a blog entry a few years ago called Hello Donald. And basically what I'm arguing there is that we're still, as a social movement, in the pioneer stage. We're a very young movement. It's not been in existence for 100 years yet. And so in social movement terms, we're fairly new. And these next slides here are from the blurb that I used to introduce the talk. And it goes through some of the main kind of themes that we want to talk about, in the sense that the vegan movement, the vegan social movement, was started during the Second World War. And essentially, the vegans declared peace during this global conflict. That's what it was all about. So veganism was seen as part and parcel of the peace movement. It was seen as a kind of living version, if you like, of justice. I tend to call the vegan movement a justice for all movement. It's a kind of, they had a very kind of radical kind of idea. So what I'm hoping for is for you to leave this room thinking, I'm glad that I joined this movement because it's so awesome. Now you might also think, well, it's a bit utopian and maybe not very practical, but what I'm going to go through is the values of the pioneers of the movement, the people who started our movement, because I believe those values are really good, they're very valuable, there's a lot of merit to them, and we ought to maintain them. So, some of them were conscientious objectors because they didn't want to kill anyone at all, and right from the start, even from that, you can see that they made a connection between human issues and issues about other animals, which they maintained throughout their kind of writings. They talked about how, well, Watson talked about how the vegans were shattered by the experience of the Second World War. They were really shattered by it. Some of their friends died, and Watson himself, just through a bit of luck, escaped death because the German Air Force bombed the wrong place, as it were, one time, mistaking, I think, Leicester for Coventry, and they bombed Coventry, and he was in Leicester, but they were aiming for Leicester, so, you know. Essentially then, the early vegans started to ask themselves a question. What was happening with humanity? It's a big question, but they wanted to know, why had we become so violent? We have to remember that everyone is a product of their time. And these people had just witnessed a huge global conflict. And not long before that, there was the first World War. So they were trying to find out what had gone wrong, if you like, with humanity. And by working it through in their minds, they generally came up with the idea that veganism was kind of part of the solution to this. So their vision of a vegan future was truly remarkable. What I tend to argue is that because they saw veganism as a justice movement, that a vegan world for them would be a world without violence and exploitation. We'll see that from the quotes that are coming up. And so, in a vegan world for them, there should be no violence towards other animals, of course, but there shouldn't be any sexual violence, domestic violence as well. These things were very connected. So their vision was very remarkable, and we're about to see that. But there's also a movement issue that I want to talk about. As you see, I put that bit in red because it's a warning. And this is it. That there are some challenges to the original values of veganism. And I'm here really to defend those original values and say that we shouldn't, if you like, slim down. I call these challenges reducitarian challenges to the movement, or even kind of efforts to moderate what veganism is all about. Now, in social movements in general, I used to teach social movement theory, and there's lots of theories and lots of work about how social movements and social movement organisations grow and flourish, they professionalise, and then some of them start to moderate or de-radicalise. And that, I think, which is the reason I picked it out, is kind of what happened to the vegan movement a little bit, is that we're starting on this process of de-radicalisation. And I think it's coming through in two ways. But first of all, this slide, we don't have to go through it. The important part is where it says trigger event. Okay? And if you see there, number 4, it says takeoff. Okay? This is movement takeoff in social movement theory. It's obviously a very good thing for a movement to take off, because suddenly it becomes popular, loads of people join. There's a danger of loads of people joining a social movement, and the danger is that loads of people have joined the social movement. And that means that you get a lot of people who don't necessarily have the same values of the people who started the movement. So that can be a problem. And then you end up with like a dialogue, hopefully. In fact, that's my position. You know, if people want to come into a movement and challenge the founders, that in itself is not a bad thing. It's a question is, at the moment, a lot of people are coming into the movement, they don't even know the values of the founders, and yet they're telling us what the movement stands for. You know, and that is what I kind of see as actually wrong to do. You can't just come into a movement and just declare what it is. You know, you need to find out what its original founding values were. So these are the reducitarian threats, as I see it, to the vegan social movement as it stands now. This idea that has been spread around for a few years, that veganism is a diet. Obviously there's a dietary aspect to veganism, but it's not a diet, it's a philosophy. And then the second one, which is more contentious, because it comes from the activist community, which is the idea that veganism is only about our relations with other sentient beings. I claim that both of those contentions are wrong, that this is not true. These go against the founding values of our movement. So this is how it plays out. You may know, there's a kind of well-known page called The Vegan Strategist. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that. And the vegan strategist is a guy called Tobias Leonhardt, who argues that the vegan movement is relatively young and it's about food. So it's a reducitarian view of the scope of what it's about. And so the way it plans out in this part of the movement is that essentially vegans are being asked to be tolerant of consuming other animals. And so this thing is saying, you know, we should lower the standards of veganism to allow the consumption of other animals. So this is Tobias Leonhardt, and he came up with the idea of veganish recently, which I actually quite welcome, really, in the sense that veganish is not vegan, so that's okay. It's like saying pre-vegan, I think that's okay, you know. But he also says things like, someone who eats fishes or a cookie with an egg in it is still a vegan in my eyes. Well, that to me is unacceptable. Veganism's got to mean something. We can't just come into the movement and make it up as we go along. We can't do that. The other aspect, the activist one, if you like, is this. And if any of you went to the recent march in London, that was one of the prominent chants, vegan for the animals, okay? Which in a way is an acceptable thing to say if we've got in the mind the focus of our movement. So I'm going to use two concepts during this talk, focus and scope. It's not accurate if you think about the scope. It possibly is if you think about the focus. This thing from Vegan Street is a very popular one, and recently it was adapted by an activist group, and something like this wasn't the one, I kind of made this up as a version of it. This kind of thing came up. Now again, I see these as efforts to reduce the grand original meaning of vegan. So vegan for the animals is a reducitarian message, and it shouldn't be welcomed, I don't think, in the movement. So if veganism is a diet and vegan is just about other animals, if they're reducitarian messages, what were the messages and the values of the people who started the movement? And as I said, they're fairly kind of grand in their scope. This is the definition of veganism that you'll probably be very familiar with. It's the one that is put about on Facebook all the time. Interesting about the date here, this definition started to kind of come into vogue around about 1979. By 1988, this was the official definition of veganism from the Vegan Society. It's actually quite a weak definition compared with some of the earlier definitions of the people who founded the movement. It doesn't quite cover what veganism is about. It's kind of there or thereabouts, but it doesn't quite cover some of the more kind of, if you like, you could say strident statements, you could say more fundamental statements of the founders. This is one of them, and this is from 1945, so a year after our movement was formed, and this actually was Donald Watson answering a question to someone in the Vegan magazine. The object of the Vegan Society is to oppose the exploitation of sentient life, whether it's profitable to do so or not. I found myself in a conversation recently with a co-founder of a recent activist group, and they said that they were quoting the 1944 definition of veganism by Donald Watson, which was actually the 1988 one. And I said, well, that's interesting that you're quoting the 1944 definition of veganism by Donald Watson, because that doesn't exist. And they were arguing that veganism was only about other animals. And I said, well, that goes against the values of founders. And they also said that in relation to the concept of animal rights. And I said, well, that also goes against the person who originated abolitionist animal rights, which was Tom Reagan, who published a book on the case for animal rights in 1983. I said both of those things are saying that other animals' issues and human issues are interlinked, or in David Nybert's terms, entangled. And I was told that I was talking bullshit, you know. And I said, look, you know, read some of the history of the movement, and then you'll know where the movement is coming from. So this is the kind of thing that they stood for. This is Watson in 45, and in the history of veganism from the Vegan Society itself, they have a specialist called Dr. Samantha Calvert. She points out that there was a guy who I'll be quoting in a minute called Leslie Cross, very important person in the history of veganism. Leslie Cross pointed out about 6 or 7 years into it that veganism hasn't really got a good definition. We need to kind of sort it out. There are some kind of reasons, won't go into it in detail, but some kind of reasons for that. One of which is that when the Vegan Society started, everyone told them that they were going to die. Yeah? They literally told them, the doctors told them, their friends told them, all the vegetarians told them they were going to die, right? And so a lot of the early years was kind of spent proving, if you like, that the plant-based diet was a viable diet for the human being, and also that, you know, vegans can kind of live healthily. It's kind of not a problem for us anymore, although there are still some ridiculous claims on places like YouTube about the plant-based diet. But it's not really a general kind of problem. You know, we as individuals don't fear that we're going to die, presumably. You know, eventually we will. I think we all might, but there you go. But it's, you know, it's not an issue. These are a couple of kind of summary statements. This is from Eva Batt. Eva Batt, she didn't write the first cookbook, vegan cookbook, but she wrote, I think, the first bestseller vegan cookbook, which is called What's Cooking. And so in 1964, she put out a pamphlet which was called Why Veganism? And she said, veganism is one thing and one thing only, a way of living that avoids exploitation, whether it be of our fellow men, 1960s, so obviously sexist language, product of the time, okay, we'll have to allow them to do that, whether it be the animal population or the soil. Now that's interesting, isn't it? The exploitation of the soil. You know, the early vegans were very concerned about that issue, funny enough, and that issue came back into our movement in the 1980s with a book that some of you might know, which is called Diet for a New America by John Robbins. Yeah, John Robbins. Yeah. Now, that was a really interesting book, and he was very interested in the issue of topsoil. He was saying that we're depleting the quality of topsoil, and if we do that all around the globe, the Irish would say we're fecked if we do that, right? You know, I'm from Dublin, so that's very important to look at that. Now, so their concerns in those days would be called ecological concerns, and now we call it environmentalism. Okay, so that was a kind of full package of veganism. It was concern about the other animals, concern about humanity, and concern about the environment. It's a kind of full package. And then we get another strand here, which is a bit later, 1990s, which is talking about a consistent approach to human rights, animal rights, ecology, and world food problems. We tend to call that things like food security nowadays, right? But we still make that claim that in a vegan world, everyone could be fed. You know, this idea, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, I do a lot of street work, and you know, you still get the thing about, well, you know, humans are more important than other animals, and you go, okay, well, if there was two populations, you know, and there wasn't enough food for all of them, and one of them was human and one of them was non-human, who should get the food? Oh, the humans. So that's exactly the opposite of what happens. You know, something like between 12 and 14,000 children will die today, just like they did on 9/11, put it into context, today, of starvation-related issues. Okay, and yet we, as a global society, would prefer to feed the farmed animals. No farmed animal will go to bed tonight hungry, but thousands of children will. You know, and we pay lip service to the idea that we prefer human rights over other animal rights. Actually, those issues are linked. This is a great little summary here from a friend of mine called Matthew Cole. And he wrote this chapter, and he called it The Greatest Cause on Earth. You might not be able to pick that out, it's very small. That's a quote from Donald Watson. Interesting that. The early vegans thought of veganism as an overarching principle of justice that could inform everything else and be in alignment with everything else. We've got to remember, these were writing before the advent of second wave feminism and before the civil rights movement and all that. But they were basically thinking that if we could bring about vegan values into the world, we could then create a non-violent or less violent world. And so what Matthew points out is that vegan values stood for compassionate non-exploitation of other animals, of course, the core of our movement, the focus of our movement. But also what he called an emancipated vegan self, which in a bit of kind of academic jargon means kind of a reflexive human being. You know, we would ask ourselves, you know, moral questions. You know, one of our banners in Dublin is called Justice Before Profit. And that really would be one of the things that a vegan world should do. We don't ask first, is this profitable? Or is this good for our business? We ask, is this just? That's the vegan thing to do. Is that just? It's quite anarchic, actually. You know that kind of thing about anarchy means total freedom? Actually, it means total freedom with total responsibility. It's a different thing. A lot of people miss out that last bit. And so you should come to a situation and go, well, I want to do X, but is X a just thing to do? That's what vegans do. That's what vegans should be doing across the board, if you like. A compassionate human society would flow from all that, Matthew says. And then those interconnections, the interconnected goals, which are transformed humans from those warlike being into a peaceful being, and that transforms human society as well. Am I sparking off there, or is that the lights? And those are, they said, from the reconfiguration of human relations with other sentient beings, or I think he put it animal-human relations in the book. So those are kind of vegan values that a kind of historian of the movement has pointed out as well. I think at the moment Matthew is writing something based on the kind of correspondence that of Donald Watson, which is going to be quite interesting. Now this is the Leslie Cross thing. There's about 3 or 4 things from Leslie Cross. I'm not going to read them out. I'm just going to pick out the important parts. Leslie Cross did a lot of writing about what veganism is, and he kind of really laid down, I mean Donald Watson is a famous person, but he really laid down the core of our values. Leslie Cross is a very important person. It's on VegFest Express. It's about the history of the vegan movement. Obviously I talk about Watson, but I've got one blog entry about Leslie Cross. I invite you to look at that, because he's a very, very important person in terms of the history of our movement. And so Leslie Cross says that in a vegan world, a great historical wrong would be righted. We'd get rid of some of the problems. Obviously, again, with the focus, the use of other animals by humans would be unthinkable, ruled out. Liberation for the creatures, again, the language is different from how do we put it now. And the minds and hearts of humanity, that's an important phrase, that they thought that we could be kind of psychologically liberated as well. We'll come back to that. There's a quote about that. And then he says this, is a very powerful statement at this, I think. Veganism is in truth an affirmation that where love is, exploitation vanishes. I think that's a really kind of powerful thing to say. And again, the benefits to humanity of a vegan world, of vegan values, not just eating plants, of vegan values, would be incalculable. So, in the light of this, veganism is not so much welfare, but liberation, he says. Putting it in that kind of camp, if you like, between welfare and rights, or whatever you want to call it. Now, the more astute of you will know that that black one should have been in order. But I left it like that. Well, actually, I effect it, and I kind of messed up this slide. But I thought, well, if I don't mention it, no one will notice, right? So I'm not going to mention it. This is another one. This is from 1951, and so was the first one, 1951. Now, this is interesting because we go back to focus and scope here. So you can say focus is, for the animals bit. The scope is everything else, okay? And it's a whole package. And this is a really powerful statement of that from Leslie Cross. The object of the vegan movement is the end of the use of other animals by humans. Again, the use, right? So this puts it into the rights thing. The basic difference between animal welfare and animal rights is that animal rights is about ending the use of other animals. It's a critique of the use of them. Animal welfare is more about looking at and regulating the treatment of other animals whilst they're being used. So it's very important that, right from the start, it was in the kind of rights camp, if you like. So the use, like food, commodities, work, hunting, vivisection, all animal exploitation would be gone in a vegan world. And then he says, so in the light of that, we're on the side of the liberators. And again, they said, not welfare, freedom. That's what we're looking for. We're not looking for, in Tom Reagan's words, we're not looking for bigger cages. We're looking for what?
Empty cages.
Empty cages, that's right. Very important. It's a big difference between animal rights and animal welfare, And then he said the scope, and he called it the broad aspect. He talked about the broad aspect in the scope. He said the second part of it is about what would happen to human evolution. And so they saw veganism as being part of the moral evolution of humanity. That's what would kind of free us from the barbarism that we found ourselves, which created 2 world wars in short order. We need veganism, and that would create a more moral human being, a more moral society, and hopefully a more moral world. Again, you could see that as very kind of awe-inspiring. You could see it as a bit utopian, you could see it as maybe a bit impractical, but these are the values of our movement. And he said there that we need to, it's interesting, this one. He says, until the present relationship between humanity and other animals is replaced by one of companionship on a relatively equal footing, the pursuit of happiness by humans is doomed. Relatively equal footing. One mistake people make about animal rights, and you see this on YouTube all the time, journalists ask this question in ignorance, the public do too, they're kind of more reason to be ignorant, really. But oh, you want other animals to have the same rights as human beings. There is no animal rights theory that says that. Okay, you can understand that by understanding the issue of positive and negative rights. Negative rights are our basic rights. These are the rights that protect us from being killed, from being tortured, from being oppressed. Those are our basic rights. On top of that, we build our human rights. The way I put it in my PhD was we could think about our basic rights as our animal rights. The rights that we share with other animals, because we are animals. On top of those basic animal rights, we build human rights. Which again, Reagan says things like, we're not asking for the right to ballet lessons for pigs, But journalists will ask that question, you're asking for exactly the same rights. No, animal rights is actually quite a modest idea. It's quite weird, really. It's quite a modest idea. It's got great ramifications, but it's quite a modest idea. It's quite an interesting one. All right, I think this is the last one from Cross. Interesting here. I don't pick it out later, but it says here, we are the pioneers, which I think is really great. And I think that we are still the pioneers. We're a bit later. I went vegan in 1970, so I was like 30 years, 20, 30 years after this. Right? But we are still the pioneers, I think. So he says again that veganism is about changing hearts and minds. And then he talks about the changes. And he says some changes will be obvious. There would be no butcher's shops, obviously. That we would have plant-based milks. Now this is like thinking ahead, right? And he actually put it in a really interesting way, because he said the milkman would be delivering plant-based milks, not even realizing that there wouldn't be any milkman or milk persons or milk anything by now. But so got the bit about the milk persons wrong, but got the bit about the plant-based milks right. No mother cows crying for their calves. This was an important part of their values. They wrote about this a lot. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Vegan Society actually came out of a request for a non-dairy section of the Vegetarian Society. And the Vegetarian Society very politely said no, right? And I think the vegetarians did us vegans an incredible favour when they did that. Because they said to us, no, strike out on your own. They did. Now, they were doing it because they thought veganism was too radical, but they were saying to the vegans, no, you strike out on your own. And that means that that's what the vegans did. They struck out, and then they worked it through vegan values. And that was much better than being subsumed in a section of the Vegetarian Society, that we were able to think independently and freely of that restriction, if you like. So I always think that the vegetarians did the vegans quite a favour, to be honest. No houses of slaughter. Isn't it weird that in every society, dotted around the country, there are houses of slaughter where people are employed to do that, to dismember other animals. The whole goes in and little bits come out, The houses of slaughter, in Ireland, do you know what they call the slaughterhouses? They call them factories, to hide what they're about. Oh, the pigs are going to the factory this morning. Oh, that's nice, a day out. So they hide it, No vivisection labs, no hunting. And then he talks about the changes that will be not so obvious, and this is where you go back to the benefit for humanity. So again, it was always interlinked with them. And this is where he says that our health, our physical health and our mental health would be improved by living in a vegan world. A vegan world where we're not thinking about how to instrumentally use each other, we're thinking more peacefully. We're thinking more in terms of community and stuff, you know. Again, vegan values is great in that sense, you know. Farmers come up to us in Dublin and go, "You're trying to shut us down." So, well, actually, we're trying to change you. But, you know, don't fear vegans. There'll be more farmers in the vegan world than there are now. The mega farms might be a problem, but certainly there would be a lot more, you know, small holdings and small farmers. And we'd probably go back to that thing where everything was done communally, you know, where we kind of did an rota thing and everybody used to help each other out and all that kind of stuff. So a vegan world would be more communal. There was a group called Movement for Compassionate Living. That's interesting. Check that out, Movement for Compassionate Living. That's a kind of almost like an anarchic vision of kind of vegan villages based on trees. It's really quite interesting. It's not a primitive thing. It sounds primitivist, but it's not. It's quite interesting. Movement for Compassionate Living. An interesting one. It was started by one of the pioneers who was also in the Vegfest Express thing called Kathleen Janaway. Really interesting person she was. Okay, so Leslie Cross wrote this kind of manifesto, really. This again is 54, and he called it the Surge for Freedom, and he puts veganism in line with other kind of moves towards kind of freedom in a general sense. And he said right at the beginning, this is an attempt to state in simple terms what veganism is and why and how it came into existence, and to suggest what it could mean for humanity. Again, even in the first sentence, there was no fear of talking about the scope of veganism, that this is going to be good for humanity, you know. It's not the focus, but it's the scope. And they talked about it in this kind of general way, you know. Sometimes, you know, it'll be kind of, you know, other animals, you know, the order would change, in other words, because it was all intertwined for them. It wasn't a problem for them. This is Donald Watson. This is an interesting one. This is, he's kind of looking back here, this is 1989. And so he's saying, nearly half a century later, from the beginning of the movement, with our increased knowledge and experience, we can see what pressing human problems are related to the use of other animals, that they will be solved together or not at all, and veganism will be central to their solution. That's quite a powerful thing. We used to think in the 80s, I used to take part in loads of single issues in the 80s. Regret that now. I should have been talking about veganism, but I didn't, you know. So sorry about that. And, you know, it was all kind of, should have been kind of part and parcel. We used to think that we could take out one brick from a wall at a time, and eventually it will collapse. But, you know, even kind of Berlin taught us that. You've got to hit it with a sledgehammer, replace it one at a time. Because whilst you're replacing, or, you know, trying to remove a brick here, you know, somebody is putting it back again here. You know, you've got to take these kind of systems of oppression down, and they've all got to kind of come down together. Because David Nyberg points out that they're kind of all based on the same mindset, of exploitation. You know, the mindset that exploits other animals and the planet is the mindset that exploits workers and humans all around the planet as well. Okay, this is an interesting one because Watson here, this is going back to 1947 now, he says that if the vegan values came into existence, we would be faced with creating the best, most great peaceful revolution ever known. You know, he thinks that vegan values would bring about that we would destroy some industries, which is true, but we would create other ones, again, in the better interests of humanity and the other animals alike. So again, that same pattern repeated in their writings. So we're coming to the end. This again is Matthew Cole, and I picked this out because it's interesting because we're a little bit more shy about talking about our scope nowadays. We tend to, you know, talk about focus a lot. As you can see from all those quotes, they just talked about it in an entangled way, you know. But this one, The Vegan, the quarterly journal of the Vegan Society, used to have a strapline on its magazine. And it just said living without exploitation. You know, it didn't say, you know, we shouldn't be exploiting other animals or anything like that. Living without exploitation. And they meant it, I think you can tell from the quotes, in its widest, most expansive sense. That veganism, at the heart of it, is about living without exploitation. That's what it's all about. I just leave you here with, this is the cover of David Nybert's book, which is called Animal Rights, Human Rights, Entanglements of Oppression and Liberation, where he goes through that. I think this is about 2002, 2002, yeah. And I think that is. It's David Nybert's first substantive text on this issue. Highly recommended. Brilliant, brilliant book. Okay, I'm done. Does anybody want to say anything, ask me a question? Please go ahead. We could do a mic off.
So it's not a question, I just wanted to say that we have a milk person who happens to be a man, and they deliver soy milk and those milk.
Oh, wow. Actually, funny enough, I was saying this to somebody on the way in. Somebody came up to our stall in Dublin about 3 weeks ago it was, and they said that, well, whatever you're doing is working. He was talking about, there's a campaign against greyhound racing going on in Dublin, and he said that hardly anybody is going to the stadium. But he also says, my butcher is stocking vegan items now. You know? Which obviously is just what kind of capitalists do, but it's kind of inevitable. I mean, you know, butchers will stock fruit and veg as well, but now they get to see the market. I mean, in a way, that's really interesting. That's a little bit like the take-off issue. It's great, isn't it, that, you know, all these companies and that are going, ooh, we should get into this. But, you know, these are capitalists, right? And they'll drop plant-based as quick as they took it up. So we've got to be very critical. We've got to think critically about all this. Unilever getting in and McDonald's getting in and all that, because they don't give a shit, right? They're in it for this. We've got to think critically about that. It's an inevitable part of the growth, the mainstreamness, if you like, of veganism, but we really ought to, and we ought to make it clear that we know what the score is. We know why you're doing this, mate, you know. Welcome it to the extent that we should welcome it. But really the core of it is to support the vegan companies, like Plamil. They're the important ones because they are doing it for the right reason. You know, I've always thought, you know, there's this thing, isn't it? You know, you're doing the right thing for the wrong reason, you know. And that's what a lot of those are doing.
Hi, Roger. I just want to thank you first of all for your presentation. I read most of your blog pieces that you've written.
Oh,
really.
We all think it was the only one.
I found them very insightful. As a fairly young vegan to the movement, I've been vegan about 2 years now. And I kind of stumbled upon the history by speaking to friends, meeting people. I originally thought that Peter Singer was kind of one of the founding people of the movement. So
a lot of people do, yeah.
Yeah. And I've noticed that learning a bit more about the history, still have more to learn, but there's quite a few younger activists who talk about it, just kind of jump in, and they don't have any want or interest to kind of learn about this. And I've noticed in my sort of group of circle of friends, I think it's a bit problematic in not knowing that history. And then it affects maybe the approach of how to advocate and stuff like that. But I guess my question would be, what advice would you have for young vegans who join the movement when there appears to be this kind of lack of coherent availability of this information?
Yeah, it's a good question, but it's also a difficult one. In fact, things are a little bit different in the sense that a lot of people thought Singer was the founder of the animal rights movement, which he doesn't believe in animal rights. But worse now is a lot of young people thinking that veganism started with Gary Roski, which is a bit of a disaster, you know. So there is this kind of like ignorance. In my generation, you join the movement and you kind of start reading, you know. And of course, that's an issue now, just in general terms. I mean, you know, academics will tell me that, you know, people don't read it anymore. You know, one of the wittiest things that Gary Francione ever said was that people are fatigued after reading a tweet. You know, and you know, this is true. So there is that kind of problem. When I joined the movement, I just kind of went to all my friends and got all their magazines off them and all that. And I even remember I was there with a notepad, to find out what RSPCA, what that mean, I4, what that, and so you kind of learn about it. By an analogy, I always say that, people wouldn't dream of joining the Marxist movement, if such a thing existed, without then going, I better read a bit of Marx, right? It just seems to me a respectful thing to do, to actually find out about the movement you've just joined, And I'm not expecting people to do a course on it or anything, although I might start one, I don't know. I just think it's a respectful thing to do, because that means then that when they do want to talk about their own movement, they can talk about it with some authority and depth. Whereas now, a lot of the newer vegans and the new activists and the new spokespeople even, they're quite shallow in terms of their knowledge. You kind of ask them a difficult question. I mean, some of them go on YouTube and go, I'm the mass media. They were nasty to me. They ask me difficult questions. You think, well, yeah, that's, But if you knew this stuff, they're not so difficult, And so I do think it's just, I think it's a bit of a duty, to be honest. If you join a movement, I wouldn't dream of joining a movement and not finding out at least some of the basics about the values and the history. And even if I wanted to change it, I think you should do it then in the light of that knowledge and say, okay, well, as the neo-Marxists did, we're neo-Marxists, we like this, that and the other, but we don't like this, that and the other, but at least they knew what this, that and the other was, so that's important, I think, kind of think it's a duty, really, in a way. I mean, I don't know how to overemphasize that, and it sounds a bit pompous, but I think we kind of ought to do that, just as a kind of routine thing. And maybe some of us are a bit longer in the tooth, maybe we need to kind of try and make the resources. I've actually reached out to some of the kind of newer people, the spokespeople, and encouraged them to maybe read Tom Reagan and that kind of stuff. They don't really want to go there, because they don't like it's about humans too things. Unfortunately, there's quite a lot of human haters in the movement. That is a problem, because that does go against our core values, whether we're talking about theoretical animal rights or we're talking about veganism. It's not right. No, at least they want to make that argument, at least know, where you're coming from, rather than just saying, I've said sometimes in debates with people online, they say, blah, blah, blah. I say, well, okay, but, just so you know, that goes against the entire values of the founders. And they go, F the founders. And I just find that an astonishing thing to say. You come into a movement and you go, fuck the founders. I'll say what it is. I mean, is that not the definition of arrogance? It's incredible. Yeah. So I can't really answer that, but I wish I knew. We're all done, Jim.
I think we're coming up, we're right on 12:45. I'd like to be cheeky and sneak one little question on here.
I don't like it. when the moderator asks you a question.
I mean, this is what, your 40th year of being vegan and being active for
41.
41, yeah. I think most of us would agree.
I'm still alive.
I'm not going to ask you where you get protein from. I think you're a bit of an anomaly in the sense that you've been active that whole time too and haven't, specifically burned out and you're here, like you say. Do you have any secrets to your success? Any self-care strategies? Or for people who are new advocates, what would you tell them?
Oh yeah, I think I was a bit stubborn about it. I mean, I did go through a very depressed period at one point when I was still sabbing and stuff. I started off as a hunt sab, tried to join the Hunt Saboteurs in 1977 at first, and it kind of didn't quite work. And then everything came together in 1979 for me. And I was lucky because I never went through a vegetarian phase. So I never had to go through that kind of, I regret the number of years I was a vegetarian. I never did that, I kind of, In fact, I watched a TV show. It was an old kind of news thing. Some of you will remember this, called John Craven's News Round, right? And it was like a news thing for kids. And it was about the seal kill in the Orkneys. And this seal kill came on and goes, well, we've got to kill the seals because they're eating our fish. And I thought, this is, meeting to a normal guy. I was thinking, what do you mean our fish? I just kind of like, ooh, And my logic was, surely the seals just got to the fishes before you did, you know? And so I started boycotting the flesh of fish for a few weeks while still eating, I don't know, I mean, and then I just thought, what the hell am I doing? This isn't making sense, you know? And I'm not even sure if I knew what veganism was or anything. Going back to burnout, yeah, Gary Francione once said that he didn't have the right to burn out, and I do kind of like resonate with that a little bit, because, I mean, you know, to use a phrase that is used in the movement a lot now, it's not about us, there is that, but I do think that, you know, particularly our mental health, and that is obviously very important. We are social animals, you know, and obviously people's different positions are different. I was always lucky in the sense that I had a, you know, like a vegan partner, and, you know, those kind of things. I think those are very interesting. I did a video about the difficulty of vegans not being in a vegan family, you know, and one of the particular difficulties, and this affects your psychology, I'm sure, is the fact that speaking to your family about veganism can be very frustrating. You know, can be really frustrating to do. Sociologically, because I'm a sociologist, is one of the reasons is that you're the wrong person talking to your family. Because when you talk to your family, especially if you're the younger or one of the younger members, you've got a lot of family baggage there, you know, and all the siblings are going to go, you know, I don't want this whippersnapper telling me what to do, kind of thing. Whereas they would take the points from a stranger, you know. So I always say to people, if they're having trouble with their family, just recognise that, you know, they're not necessarily the best person to be giving that message. And I know it doesn't really kind of help in a sense, but at least it means, you know, why you're getting rejected is not necessarily because of the argument. It just means that, you know, the agent of the message is the wrong one, you know. That's all I can say. I suppose I've just kind of trucked on, really, you know, and just carried on, because I almost like feel as though in my depressed times, I thought, we're never going to do this. And then I thought, well, maybe you're wrong about that, you know. It has been known. And so I actually resolved it that way. We say, well, you know, let's carry on anyway, just to see, because she could be wrong. And I suppose that was the spirit of it, I guess. This is Tim Barford, everybody, if you don't know, the manager of the Vegfest. Have you got a haircut? Me? Yeah. Has he got to be like this? Come on. I think we should start reminiscent of one of his 70s. Let's not talk about that. Let's talk about anything. No? We love Roger. Let's try to say how much we love Roger. Yeah. Roger Yates, old school animal. On an island we were vegan in the early 80s, you know, this guys were already, they were in the 70s, beast, so respect. Yeah, but you know, it was the 40s and 50s people who really laid.
Well, this is it. Now, this is it. And your blog series, Roger's done this most fantastic blog series called And If You Know Your History, and it's all on the Vegfest sites and stuff.
I plugged it, don't worry.
And it's it's really good. I mean, I know you plugged it, but what I don't think you would have mentioned is the quality of the work. Right?
Oh, it's fantastic.
There you go.